All right, hi everybody, welcome to our session, Taking Up McLuhan's Cause, Perspectives on Media and Formal Causality. And by some inexplicable coincidence, the title of our program also happens to be the title of this recently published book. Yay. And thank you. And we don't have copies of the book here for sale, but we do have cards that you can take with you.
For free?
Yeah. Yes. Why don't we pass them around? And to give a little bit of a background on this, the topic of formal cause was formally introduced to our, well, to the MEA certainly, many years ago when Eric sent me an article to publish in Explorations in Media Ecology entitled On Formal Cause. And that was the beginning of it. And then some years later, working with a publisher that I have a kind of minor role with, Neopoesis Press, and we were able to get, and Eric had put together his essay with several pieces from Marshall McLuhan together, and we published the book Media and Formal Cause by Marshall and Eric McLuhan. Of course, you all have a copy of that already, but just in case you don't, you should, because it's essential reading. In many ways, the next step after Laws of Media that completes that. Many of us felt, especially with the publication of that book, that this is kind of a major step in sort of the philosophical underpinnings of media ecology, and that we wanted to pursue the topic further. It's not the last word on the topic, but rather the beginning of a new stream of discussion. And that's where this project came from. The editors of this book are Corey Anton on my left and Bob Logan on my right.
I'm not on the right.
and myself, Lance Straight. I'm actually acting as panel chair rather than Corey.
Steve couldn't be here.
Steve Riegels couldn't be here to do it. Corey didn't want to do it, so I said, okay, I'll do it. We have to say, I mean, none of us are thrilled with the fact that the price of this book is quite high. It was not our decision. It was Intellect Press, the publisher, who set the price at a kind of, really a library price. Was it like $90? About $100. So, of course, if you got the cash to spare, or there are some unlocked rooms in then please get a hold of the copy. Otherwise, if you're at an institution, we do ask that you get your school's library to order it. I'd just like to read you the contents of the book, it begins with a foreword by Eric McLuhan, who is going to be given the last word at our session today, and then a trialogic introduction that is a three-way dialogue between the editors, between the three of us. And then the chapters begin with a contribution from Corey, actually two contributions on that. Then a chapter from Paulo Granada, who's here at the convention today, and one from Laura Trulio, who's also here at the convention today. Hers looks at the connection between Aristotle and Aquinas, a name that is probably burned into your minds by now. As far as McLuhan's philosophy, then my own contribution and Bob's contribution, you'll be hearing from us. A chapter by Yoni van den Eide, and about objectivity and formal cause. One from the philosopher Chad Hansen on forms of causality. Steve Riegels, who isn't here, on anti-environmental art and its role in formal cause. Eric Jenkins, is he here?
He's here.
He's here, yeah. So, why isn't he here?
He's gardening.
He's gardening?
Good.
Okay. Of memes, modes, minor audiences, and formal cause. Kirk Zemurowski, After Effects Before Causes, about artistic intent. Peter Zhang on something, and Adina Karasik, connecting formal cause to the Kabbalah. There's also an index. Corey worked hard on it.
I did. I worked hard on that.
So, we hope that you'll find a way to read the book, because we think the contents of it are really worthwhile. I should also add, this is the first book to be published in a new media ecology series put out by Intellect Press, which would then be the third media ecology book series. There was the Hampton Press series, which came to an end. The Peter Lang series, which I'm supervising, and now the Intellect series, which Phil Rose is supervising. And along with this book, his anthology, Confronting Technopoly, was also published almost at the same time. So with that, I am going to turn things over to our panelists, and we're going to start. We're going in alphabetical order, which is always terribly unfair, but Corey thought it was a good idea.
I did. I like it. It worked well for me on this.
Yeah. So we'll begin with Corey Anton.
Thank you very much, Lance. Thank you all for coming here, and I'm really greatly honored to be in this collection and to have participated with you fellows on putting this together. And I think just the fact that there is an alphabetacy and it has an order and I've benefited from it, that's formal cause. I mean, in some way there it is very plain and simple, you can sort of see it. But I thought what I tried to do here, what I'm trying to do here real quickly is to give a thumbnail sketch of Aristotle's four causes, just for convenience sake, to just review this real quickly, and then talk about how I'm following out as best as I can the way that this shakes out in the work of Marshall McLuhan, and the way that we can look at this in the terms of the kind of media that we see around us today. And hopefully it's providing a kind of methodological framework to anticipate the unanticipated side effects of a given technology or of a given medium. So people know Aristotle's four causes. Basically, when Aristotle talks about how a thing comes into being, or the nature of a thing's coming into being, he says there's basically four kinds of cause. There's material, efficient, formal, and final. And the simplest example would be to take something like a fork or a pair of shoes. So if I take a fork, the material cause refers to the fact that the fork has to be made of something. It has to be made of stone or wood or plastic or something like this. If I have shoes, they have to be made of leather, or they have to be made of a fabric or a plastic or something like this. Now, the efficient cause is what is the sequence of events that unfold in the producing or the fashioning of the item. So the fork, it could be whittled, it could be carved, it could be plastic injection molding, it could be forged. Same with the shoes, they could be cobbled in a whole bunch of different ways, or even plastic injection molding. Now when you get to formal and final, these are much trickier. Not only have these been largely abandoned by the sciences, but these, again, these are a little bit more nuanced, and they have to deal with dynamics of the object in terms of either use or intelligibility, rather than the materiality or the way that they were put together. Now, I'm going to say it's formal and final, and I'm going to come back to formal for a second. So final is basically, it's the for the sake of which. It's the ends that are served, and that's why that thing is what it is. So in the case of a fork, it's a certain kind of eating. In the case of shoes, it could be for protection, it could be for to be fashionable. There's some end served by it. Now, formal cause is, I think, the most nebulous, the most ephemeral, most difficult to get at in some way. But it's basically what the medievals would call quiddity. It's whatness. It's how you know what something is. And so the way I would encourage people to think about it is, if you're fashioning the fork, how do you know when to stop? How do you know when it's done? When you know that it's done, it's completing your idea of what a fork is. That is, whatness is being conveyed by your recognition of the fork having been completed. That is, the fork as a fork is its quiddity, and I recognize it as a fork. Now, how does this relate to McLuhan and media studies? What would happen in, again, this, cannot recommend it enough, this wonderful book that Eric and Marshall had put together, of his writings and Marshall's, called Media and Formal Cause. For me, it was such an eye-opener. I was so excited. I got asked to write a review of it, and etc. And I really, sort of had a sense of reappreciating insights that I had had before from understanding media, but within a whole new context of formal cause. And I think it came in particular from a line where Marshall had said to, I think it was Father John Culkin, that all of his work in some way was kind of informed by this principle of formal cause. And so think of, I'll give you an example of what he's talking about. So here's the book, and the book has seriality, uniformity, standardization, left to right. Those are the sensibilities, the appetites, the biases that this medium has. Formal cause refers to the way that those kinds of orientations, biases, and structures, they start to become inbuilt appetites that seek to satisfy themselves elsewhere. So this shirt, when you notice these are straight angles, uniform sized buttons, equal distance all the way down. The book was the formal cause of this shirt. When you look at the rectangular design of this room was obviously constructed under the formal cause of Euclidean rectangularity, forms of straight angles. Again, there's a lot of technologies that were in the backdrop that made this seem to be the intelligible orientation or the way to satisfy some of those appetites. Now, I think part of what, I want to stress why this is why it's so crucial to focus on quiddity rather than concepts. Formal cause is not just an idea. It's not just a concept. Concepts turns it into something that seems, I guess, overly intellectual or subjective, rather than something with the pace of associations and relations in the world. So let me give you a real quick example of this. Take television. Television didn't just change how we think about news, politics, and education. Television changed what politics, education, and news are. They change how we do it. There's certain kinds of appetites and expectations that, again, are seeking to satisfy themselves in any realm, right? I think news, politics, and education are just very simple. We could take family relationships, all kinds of other examples. But the book, right? I mean, the book didn't just do my shirt in this room. It did things like lawns. I guess there's countless different technologies that we could look at and try to say, if you want to like hold up the crystal ball and say, where is this technology going to take us? You say, what exactly are the kinds of appetites growing out of this, and where are they likely to then build up and try to satisfy themselves elsewhere? I think to people who are interested in it right now, I would encourage people to think about things like point and click, drop and drag. That these are now part of people's sensibilities, and it's making it seem as if anything that isn't push button, remote control accessible, microwavable ready, blah, 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 it's like a big bang. That there's a kind of expectation for everything to be able to be conveniently accessed and manipulated. And so you can just anticipate lots and lots of technologies moving toward the convenience of the user. I was thinking about, how is having one's own room a formal cause of the privatization that's happening in countless ways across the culture? It's funny, I just bought a 2014 RAV4. It has separate climate controls for the driver and for the passenger. It's really fascinating. Like, well, how did that come about? Well, yeah, it's in some way we think about technologies of privatization and individualization, and that will continue to sort of spin out and satisfy itself in lots of ways. I think that anybody who's concerned about it, you should see Trump as the formal cause of the rise of incivility. That is, he is becoming a kind of a set of orienting practices that then they bleed out and bleed over into other areas. I don't think it would be too much to make the claim that Facebook came out of television as the formal cause. That is, TV made celebrities, stars, and then the tabloids became, paparazzis taking pictures of people. And that's what Facebook is. It's basically people who become their own paparazzis as they try to make themselves celebrities in their own world. But it's spinning out in a self-similar image to what they've seen on television. To give you some more technical examples, and I'm going to move into maybe where some of the positions differ. I mean, the title of the book is called Taking Up McLuhan's Cause, and I think part of it was...
Which is a really great pun.
It's a great pun, and it was on the range of responses to the Media Informal Cause book. And so I'm going to see if I can somewhat situate myself in relationship to both as I understood Eric's position and then Bob's and Lance's. First off, I think one of the clearest ways to illustrate what I just said about material, efficient, formal, and final is try to imagine tuning into a radio station where there's only a foreign language that you've never heard before. What you get there is the efficient and the material cause. You can't get the material, you can't get the formal and final. You're the formal cause of the words you hear. You're the formal cause of the words you hear. I can only do so much. I can produce the sounds can hit your ears, but if you don't have that vocabulary, those words, you'll just hear a succession of sounds, right? And for me, it was really interesting, like the phenomenon of mondegreens, right? A mondegreen is a misheard song lyric. It's such a clear example. A mondegreen, it has to be that it's the receiver is the formal cause of a mondegreen. You can't create a mondegreen without another person already having an appetite for a different word that they have misheard. Now, as far as, I got a couple minutes, I'll just try to wrap up here. I think I'm going to do this visually. As I understand it, I see, I guess, Eric McLuhan a little bit, well, I guess I'll do right, I'm not sure, right to left. On one side, I think, as I understand Eric McLuhan, it's more along the line of formal cause it's largely or exclusively within the human realm and the human realm of eidos, the human realm of quiddity, and it's the way that the human soul or the human mind brings forms and intelligibly to the world. I think I'm a little bit over on the side of that, I'm next over, and I think that formal cause in fact does apply to higher mammals. It may even apply to artificial intelligence as they're able to do deep program learning. And the evidence for animals for me is robust in the fact that not only can you have like fishing lures and scarecrows, but animals do engage in forms of mimicry and deception that rely upon another organism to take something as what it isn't. So I mean, there are some very complex examples we could give and go into. I think over there, I think next to me would be Lance. I think Lance is going to suggest that formal cause is even more pervasive in nature and in certain ways. And I think Bob is on the furthest end where he's going to suggest that formal cause can even be found in the inorganic realm and it may be part of the ground for emergence.
I'd go with that too.
So I mean, yeah, okay, you're a little bit more on the emergence side as well. At any rate, I do think there are a lot of different interpretations of formal cause. I think it's a very robust topic, and I think to people who want to understand the kinds of effects that are coming with new media, any medium that you see, you ask yourself, what are its biases of space? What are its appetites of associations of time? And as soon as you can lay those out, you can start to see how those are going to bleed out and try to satisfy themselves elsewhere. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And now this. Bob Logan.
A formal good morning.
Good morning.
Or as Aristotle would say, kalimera. I am no Aristotle scholar, but I can pronounce his name like my Greek neighbor. But I'll continue using the English pronunciation.
The correct one.
New York is not the center of the world, Andy. What do you mean?
No.
Title of my talk is Fluid and Causality. Technological Determinism, Formal Cause, and Emergence. So for me, the four causes are very simple. Let's think about building a house. Material cause, the bricks, the wooden studs, the drywall. Efficient cause, the builder. Final cause, the purpose. What's the house for? To live in, or is it a school? And then the formal cause. That's the plan. How are you going to build a house? That's my interpretation of the four causes. So, what was McLuhan's relation to causality? That's an interesting question. McLuhan was not a technological determinist, as some people who refuse to understand what he wrote like to pin on him as a way of putting him down. He's not a technological determinist in the sense that he did not posit a linear relationship between technology and their effects. He talks about the reversal of cause and effect. How can you be a technological determinist if you reverse cause and effect? He does a reversal of figure and ground. He said, most people start with the figure, I start with the ground. So once again, he's not into linear cause and effect. His media ecology view certainly incorporates causality. However, the relationship between the user and their technology is not a simple one. It cannot be summed up with a simple linear cause and effect form of technological determinism. Hey, by the way, Sir Isaac Newton was a determinist. So was Albert Einstein. There's nothing wrong with being a determinist. It's just a question of, do you look at the complexity of the relationship, or do you make it simple, linear, sequential? Marshall was anything but linear and sequential. So in Einstein's general theory of relativity, matter curves space, and then matter moves in that curved space. This is again a very systems approach to understanding the gravity. For McLuhan, media create a ground of interactions. And then each medium operates in the ground of those interacting media. He wrote, a new medium is never an addition to an old one, nor does it leave the old one in peace. It never ceases to oppress the older media until it finds new shapes and positions for them. This is not a linear cause and effect guide. McLuhan's approach to understanding media parallels that of emergentists and complexity theorists. Now let me tell you what those fancy words mean. It starts with a fellow named Ludwig von Bertalanffy, who is a general systems theorist, who Lance claims was influenced by Krasivsky. It is possible.
It's not a claim. It's a fact.
Maybe it's an alternative fact. But I agree, it is a fact. Now, the idea is the following. A system has properties that none of its components have. This conversation will have properties that none of us as individuals have because of our interaction with each other. Now, the causality is quite complex. You see, the system is made of components, and the system has effects, or causes effects on its components. The components have an effect on the system as a whole. So one is called top-down causality, from the system to its components. The other is called bottom-up causality, from the components of the system to the system. And you cannot disentangle them. A technological determinist would never get this. They cannot see that there are two kinds of causalities going on. Top-down, bottom-up. So I believe that McLuhan's notion of formal cause in many ways is equivalent to the most salient features of strong emergence. His reversal of figure and ground. Let me give a quote. My writing baffles most people because I begin with ground and they begin with figure. So he begins with the system and then he gets to the components of the system, which is each individual medium. This is why I believe that Marshall McLuhan is a systems thinker in the way that Bertalampi described general systems theory. One of the aspects of general systems theory and emergence and complexity theory is you cannot predict how the components of the system will interact. You never know what's going to come out. And this is true of Marshall McLuhan. He said, everything that I predict about the future has already happened. He doesn't predict the future. He just observes carefully what's happening today. So that's another reason I believe that McLuhan parallels complexity theory. Aristotle's analysis of cause presumes that there was an agent, the source of an efficient cause, and with a purpose, with a final cause, using certain materials, the material cause, to achieve that final cause, making use of an existing pattern or form that played the role of formal cause. With emergent phenomena, the pattern or form is not known ahead of time. As one cannot predict beforehand how the components of a complex system will organize themselves. I cannot predict how you're going to react to my talk. I have no idea. I can predict something that's already happened. You're going to enjoy it because you laughed at it. There is certainly no purpose in the way the components self-organize themselves, because the purpose of a system is, if it has only one only, becomes apparent after it has emerged, not before. You don't know what's going to happen when you put a bunch of components together. You only know it afterwards. So you can't work with a plan. So McLuhan's notion of formal cause, taken from Aristotle, is actually more aligned with strong emergence theory than it is of Aristotle's original notion of formal cause. The notion that the medium is a message shares many of the features of complexity theory. The content of the message interacts with the medium. And the content of the medium changes the nature of the medium itself. So, again, bottom up from the content, top down from the medium. That's it, guys. I like it short and sweet.
My turn? Get in there. Okay. I'll start by saying the title of my chapter in the book is The Effects That Give Cause and the Pattern That Directs. And just also a quick additional plug that I take up this topic as well in a book that I have coming out in about a month or so. That's simply titled Media Ecology, subtitle An Approach to Understanding the Human Condition. That'll be out by Peter Lang. I think it's actually available for pre-order already on Amazon. Anyway, and one of the key terms in my view, I in that book, I talk about 4 key terms for media ecology, which of course is medium and environment, also bias, as in the bias of the medium, and effects. The concern is with effects, and this was something that was, of course, very central to McLuhan, but also to other media ecologists who ask, what is the effect of technology, what is the effect of a medium, what is the effect of any kind of innovation. And this has been historically very problematic for us, because when you talk about effects, it seems like people connect that to cause and effect and the mechanistic, Newtonian mechanistic view of the world. And part of the problem is that we were stuck with that kind of language when we go back to McLuhan's time. And so that opened the door to accusations of technological determinism, sometimes media determinism, which, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, about 99% of the time that I've seen that phrase invoked, it's a straw man argument meant to dismiss McLuhan or media ecology more generally. And there is no treatise on technological determinism or manifesto, McLuhan's manifesto of technological determinism. It doesn't exist. But it was a problem with language and also to some extent with conceptualization. And in a sense, this is where formal cause and also the later development in systems theory, particularly in the late 20th century with the emergence of emergence and autopoiesis and complexity theory, that these help to provide alternate ways of talking about effects that are not like billiard balls, one hitting another. I use as an example, just to think about this, the old English kind of folktale poem. It goes like this: for want of a nail the shoe was lost, for want of a shoe the horse was lost, for want of a horse the rider was lost, for want of a rider the message was lost, for want of a message the battle was lost, for want of a battle the kingdom was lost, and all for the want of a horseshoe nail. And in that form, it works very nice to say, you know, small details matter. But if you were to sort of condense it into the kind of language that we would use in media ecology, we would say the lack of a nail caused the fall of a kingdom. And people would say, well, that's ridiculous, right? I mean, and it's the same thing if we go back to the classic Lynn White argument about how the stirrup caused feudalism, which he never said in those terms. McLuhan came closer to that kind of language, but even he didn't say it. And once you get through it, you see there's like really a very complex set of interactions that they're pointing to. I also kind of know just that there was something, you know, that a kind of probe and in a way a provocative form that McLuhan used about X caused Y. That was great for stimulating talk, but freaked people out who were not sympathetic to it. And the humorist Marvin Kittman, and this is in a chapter in a book I co-edited some years ago called The Legacy of McLuhan. And he contributed a chapter to it, and he had all these parodies of them. I wanted to mention some of them. The invention of lasagna made the Pullman car obsolete. The invention of eyeglasses makes lasagna obsolete. The invention of the Pullman car makes the draft lottery obsolete. The invention of the home videotape recorder makes Jack Gould obsolete. Some of these are all references. The invention of the camera makes copious consumption obsolete. And in conversation with his wife, Kittman's wife, who I know him, by the way, his wife's very sweet. The invention of your father makes my getting a regular job obsolete. So this is like a loving play on this kind of formula. You know, in some ways, in response to the accusation of media determinism, some folks in media ecology have said, okay, yeah, all right, we're technological determinists. You know? And I've actually tried to encourage people not to accept that. Some another idea that sort of emerged was soft determinism. It opens the door, and that was sort of Lynn White's view. It opens the door, it does not compel you to enter into it. But still, that word determinism, it elicits this negative response and knee-jerk response. So again, this is where the language of formal causality, in one direction, coming from antiquity, is very helpful in thinking about things differently. And I agree with Bob, it is moving away from this sense of linearity. So we're really talking about that it's not one billiard ball hitting another, but it's the table that the game is played, that is the formal cause, and that's the medium that we're talking about, which is, after all, the environment. And this is what we're trying to understand. And you would think it would be obvious when we use the word ecology, but for most of our history, we haven't quite centered on the implications of that term. But it's not one thing causing another thing, but rather how the environment influences everything inside the environment. So formal causality, or at least one of the understandings, and especially how one of the ways that Eric explains it, is that it's the causality of the environment or of the ground on the figures contained within. I wanted to note, I thought it was interesting that Eric characterized formal cause as being outside of time. And I wanted to suggest that it's actually the reverse, but for the very same reason, that when we look at the other causes, material cause comes first, because first you have the materials. Efficient cause comes next, it's what you do to the materials. Final cause comes last, because that's the end result of what you're doing. So that formal cause is the form that sort of transcends that process, so it exists, it is time itself. And I think that one of the things, we go back to the Aristotelian distinction, there's substance and there's form. One of the problems with the word form is that we tend to think of it visually, and therefore in a static mode, which is why I connected it or tried to put it together with pattern, because pattern, I think, gives us a more dynamic way of thinking about it than form. There's pattern, there's rhythm. These are sort of ways in time to think about it, and so when looking at the sources, in one sense, McLuhan has this famous metaphor of the maelstrom, and there's the idea of pattern recognition, seeing in the chaos of the maelstrom, seeing the orderly pattern that enables the sailor to escape. And I was quite actually excited to read an essay by Poe. I used to say Poe's story, the Maelstrom, but the essay, The Philosophy of Composition. Let me read to you. This is, this is obviously a key inspiration here. Poe writes, he's writing about composition and how he wrote the Raven. And he may be totally fabricating this, but he writes, "Nothing is more clear than that every plot worth the name must be elaborated to its denouement." Did I say that right? Denouement? Denouement, okay. Before anything be attempted with the pen. It is only with the denouement constantly in view that we can give a plot its indispensable air of consequence or causation by making the incidents, especially the tone at all points, tend to the development of the intention. And then a little later he says, "I prefer commencing with the consideration of an effect, keeping originality always in view. I say to myself in the first place, of the innumerable effects or impressions of which the heart, the intellect, or the soul is susceptible, which one shall I on the present occasion select?" Now, and this goes back to one view that Corey talked about, is that it requires a consciousness for formal cause to take place. And again, going back to antiquity and the Middle Ages, there's the idea that there always is a consciousness. God is the micromanager who makes every blade of grass grow and, in every moment of time to continue, so it's not a problem. But that's where systems theory, I think, comes in with a view that you can have something that is similar to intention, but it's that the universe works towards certain ends. The big one is entropy, right, which is the heat death of the universe. That's a final cause that is not a conscious decision. It's simply the tendency of the universe to move in a certain direction, to work towards that final end. I want to read another passage. This is from Fridtjof Capra, who spoke the last time we were in California. He was one of our featured speakers. And this is from his book about Leonardo da Vinci. And he says, from the very beginning of Western philosophy and science, there's been a tension between mechanism and holism, between the study of matter, substance, structure, quantity, and the study of form, pattern, order, quality. The study of matter was championed by Democritus, Galileo, Descartes, and Newton. The study of form by Pythagoras, Aristotle, Kant, and Goethe. Leonardo followed the tradition of Pythagoras and Aristotle, and he combined it with his rigorous empirical method to formulate a science of living forms, their pattern of organization, and their processes of growth and transformation. He was deeply aware of the fundamental interconnectedness of all phenomena and of the interdependence and mutual generation of all parts of an organic whole. And Capra's argument was that Leonardo represents the path not taken by Western science. So, I mean, again, this is the understanding of formal cause. We can see it, and I think the book that serves as an excellent companion, he's going to be speaking here at this convention, is Terence Deacon's book, Incomplete Nature. That is systems theory. It gets a little complicated at times, but it actually provides an explanation of how life originated from non-life, because evolution only works once there is life, but it doesn't explain how life can emerge, how consciousness can emerge from just the firing of neurons and that sort of thing. And he brings in formal cause. It's not like a major topic, but he actually, at various points, notes the connection between what he's talking about and formal cause. Deacon brings us back to Gregory Bateson, very key source as well for media ecology and his steps to an ecology of mind and mind and nature. Bateson argues that mind is not just in organisms, it's in nature more generally. And with that, Bateson was famous for asking a question about the pattern which connects. And Ted Carpenter also uses that phrase, and apparently it's big in anthropology. What are the patterns that connect? Now that's recognition. We recognize patterns. Very big point for McLuhan, pattern recognition. But are the patterns out there or not? And I think that's where we differ. I think Corey would say the patterns only exist in our heads. Out there, it's all random. No? Okay. Well, let me, at least maybe some others would object to that. But I would say that the patterns are in nature, and that's really part of what Deacon is saying. Things fall into patterns. When we get to the final entropy, then there won't be any patterns left. But as it exists now, the counter to entropy is that things sort of order themselves and fall into certain patterns that we then recognize as being out there. Tyler Volk did a wonderful book, another student of Bateson's, called Meta Patterns, where he shows things like spirals, and just the fact that math applies to things is the evidence of formal causality being out there. That a Fibonacci spiral is just a phenomenon we find from the microscopic to the astronomic. That is the form that things tend to fall into, and that's where I arrived at the Emergence is not the explanation for formal cause, because emergence is the effect, that which emerges. So I use the phrase, the pattern that directs is what we're talking about. That's formal cause, that there is something in the universe that pushes things or that moves things. There's a tendency for things to fall into patterns. That's, the way that I connect Aristotelian formal causality with contemporary systems theory. Thanks. So now, to correct all our misconceptions, we turn to Eric.
Well, I'm going to have some fun. And I'd like at some point to turn it over to you for questions, because that's something done at these levels. So we have about 20 minutes. Maybe, I'm not going to try to pick on individual speakers, but because...
Pick on Bob.
Well, he's noticed. Notice he backed up a little. I'd like, a lot of what you guys said, overall, interesting notes. So I want to look at some of the points of overlap, and also get in a few thoughts about what I've discovered about formal cause. I started to investigate formal cause because there were some real idiots on the NEA list pontificating about formal cause and what it meant to conclude and what it really is. They had been floating around Mars for a while, I think. They didn't have much contact with reality. I happened to be on the scene when my father was using this idea. And I had some ideas about where he got it from colleagues at the Pontifical Institute for Medieval Studies, HBT. Not that it's Catholic at all, because it starts with Aristotle. It lies dormant for a long time. The Middle Ages picks it up. By accident, really. They didn't go to Aristotle and see, let's see what Aristotle, Plato, the Christians, what they all had to say. No, it was the fact that the Middle Ages was kicked off by a sudden supply of paper. And when you had paper, then you could have writing, and writing was circulated. And one of the things that got retrieved was a whole lot of manuscripts from antiquity. So these suddenly came to light, courtesy of the Arabs. And Aquinas, among others, but Aquinas particularly, got interested in formal cause, as well as the other three. So there's that part of the story. In my own study, I tried to simply do one job, and that is to ascertain exactly what it was my father found in formal cause and the other causes that was germane to study of medium. So I went at Aristotle. I had to relearn Greek, which I'd mostly forgotten. But I got into Aristotle and I discovered that the mess largely created by translators. And translators weren't too certain about formal cause because Aristotle wasn't too clear about it. He had two ideas about it. And then matters got a lot muddier when philosophers took it up. They can make mud pies out of just about anything. What's that old line from Harry Belafonte? It was clear as mud, but it covered the ground. And the philosophers decided, by and large, that final cause is the aspiration that you aim at, and that it's the last piece of the chain of efficient causes. And that isn't final cause at all. If that were true, then final cause would be an effect. And it's not, it's a cause. There are two of the causes, formal, efficient, material, and final. Two of the causes operate inside time. Two of them operate outside of linear time. The two that operate inside time are efficient cause. It's absolutely sequential. And material cause. Because materials are mutable, they change over time, they decay, or they mature. But the other two, formal and final, are a little outside of that. They're in synchronic time, not diachronic. So final cause, here's the funny thing, see, final cause is there from the outset. It's not at the end, it's right here from the very beginning. And it acts as a cause in a rather mysterious way. I'm not going to go into that now, but it's good to be clear on some of these. Two of the causes are concerned with being, two of them are concerned with becoming. And guess what? Being and becoming are the foundation of metaphysics. So, formal cause has to do with the definition, the intelligent being of whatever the subject. Final cause also, I was sort of persuaded after working on this thing for a couple of years that Aristotle arrived at final cause as a sort of homage to Plato. Plato had invented the ideas, the ideal form. And so for Plato, the ideal is an archetype. For Aristotle, the ideal, the final cause, is a cliche.
So what? So cliche.
A cliche, and as we know from that wonderful study from cliche to archetype, the old archetype, no, what is it? New archetype is the old cliche writ large. So Aristotle was flipping that around. And he had trouble with final cause as well. He was on the dividing line between two states of mind, two conditions of the imagination. And he had one foot in one area and one foot in the other. Plato, too, had this problem. He apparently arrived in Athens as a street corner mind. He was a courageous. And so he had some of that old pre-literate sensibility, and he knew how to move that son in the street. But he was more interested as a philosopher, a dialectician, in abstract thought, not participatory thought. And dialectic is all about the word in the mind, before speech. And most people who aren't literate will tell you, well, how can you think without speaking? How many of you think in words? How many of you think in images? There really is a sort of dividing like that. 50 years ago, if you'd asked an audience that, how many think in words? Almost all the hands would go up. The ones that didn't were, well, many of them artists, one or another people. The balance, male and female, thinking in images or thinking in words was decidedly on the male side. But beginning in the 70s and all through the 80s, right to this time, you say, how many of you think in images? A few hands are trembling. How many of you think in images? They all go up. We change our way of thinking, the way we orchestrate our sensibilities. And this change is reflected in the balance of the causes in our thinking. So we have two causes to do with being and two causes to do with becoming. In a nutshell, formal cause is, my father's subtitled Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man. The extensions of man is a statement of etymology. The etymology of our technologies is the user. The fork is a wonderful example. The etymology of the fork is right here. The fork has tines, it has a little palm, it has an arm, a forearm. It's modeled after the human body. And thanks for that, by the way, Corey, it's very useful. So the user, in this case, is the form, provides the form. In fact, the user is always the formal cause. The formal cause of an advertisement is the audience. And they are very, very pointed. They're aimed straight at this guy. They've got all sorts of statistics and numbers. They can describe the user, the audience, the person they're putting that down to the last detail. And this, by the way, is exactly what Poe was doing in the philosophy of composition. That particular essay is dead center classical rhetoric, not Aristotle. Aristotle is a dialectician, and his rhetoric is practically no use to a real rhetorician. The real rhetorician, the Ciceronian rhetorician, begins with the audience. And there's a whole division of Mercutio, devoted to tailoring what you're doing to that audience. And Poe's giving you a chapter and verse on exactly how he tailored the poem Raven to his reader and the effect he wanted to produce. The effect the advertiser wants to produce is not to wake you up and charge your intellect with thoughts and enliven. No, he wants you to be asleep because you're better, more easily led that way. He wants you to buy. So this is part of the difference between the PR man and the advertiser. The PR man cares a lot about what you think about the company's image, and so on. The advertiser doesn't give a damn about that. Think what you like, buy. Arrange it. There's a lot of great overlap and so on. Essentially, that's the difference. So the advertiser is working with formal cause. He wants to change you from someone who doesn't buy into someone who does buy. That's a modification of being. The PR man cares what you think. He wants to change your mind. The advertiser wants to change you. One is becoming, the other is being. Formal cause, a couple of synonyms for formal cause, and they've been brought up here in somewhat overlapping manner. Another word for formal cause is ground.
What?
Ground. Figure and ground. The ground is the formal cause of the figure. The way the sea is the formal cause of the shape of the island. As the sea changes, the island changes. As the ground changes, the figure changes. Another word for formal cause is medium. And that's why Marshall McLuhan is interested in this. It's the only kind of causality that uses the environment as a cause. He said the medium is the message. He's saying the environment is the message of the new thing. There are a couple of paradoxes here. The environment is always a side effect of the figure. Exactly the way, for example, the side effect of the motor car is the road. But here's the paradox. The road has to be there in order for the formal cause, for the effect of the car to be imaginable. It's outside time. The effect comes first, then comes the car. The road is first, then the car. What do you call, let's say two baseball teams get together. the Athletics and the Giants. They have a ball game. And there's nobody in the stands. What do you call that?
Practice.
A practice. And the audience is ball game. Without the audience, it's a practice. The audience is the crowd. So, yeah, okay. He's saying it's time to cut it off.
It's time to hear from the formal cause.
Can I just say one thing real quick? I just want to clarify this. I don't want to be accused of being anomalous. I think there's a difference between natural kinds of things and classification. But I'm going to add, just to last real quickly, the difficulty is that not all patterns are formal cause.
Okay.
Let's hear from the formal cause.
All right. All right, yeah.
A quick question. How does the whole concept of affordances fit into this analysis of formal cause?
Affordances?
Affordances?
Gibson's
Like a computer, you have to,
Yeah.
it gives you clues about how to use it so that the computer teaches its users how to perform with it. And in designing technologies, you
Right.
design the affordances into them. There are other successful or not so much.
And it originates in J.J. Gibson's work on perception, so that you have the environment that's out there, and in that conceptualization, the medium is what through which we perceive the environment. So it would be, say, the air and the light, that's the medium, which I think that understanding from is actually very important to understand why Marshall McLuhan put so much emphasis on sense perception, because there's this older tradition of the medium as the way in which we perceive things. But then affordances are our perception of what the environment can offer us, but it's both positive and negative. To use the same word, what the environment affords us either as a benefit or a threat. And then that was picked up, I think Dan Norman picked it up to talk about design. So if you think about the technology as being out in the environment, and then what does the user perceive about the technology? How do you design it so that they recognize what the technology does or what it can do, its affordances? I think it got picked up in a more superficial sense by a lot of people, where they just, and it mostly refers then to what a technology does, its uses in a way, as opposed to its effects. Because affordances really doesn't speak to effects. It's just what it has to offer us. And one thing that people then tend to leave out was that Dan Norman, in addition to affordances, also talked about constraints, which comes from Bateson. How does the technology or the environment constrain our ability to act in certain ways? And that's just as important, or in many ways, than the argument coming from folks like Bateson and Deacon would be that the constraints and the absences are more significant. This relates to gaps and intervals in McLuhan's view. That's more significant than, in a sense, the positive point about what it affords us. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Is it, so affordances
Let's have
are...
other people.
Okay, sorry.
Bob, I'm chairing this, excuse me.
You're excused.
I'm sorry?
Oh, that's okay. Entertain other questions, please, that's fine.
Okay, yeah.
Well, it's coming out of a Eastern perspective. I was just wondering if there's been any consideration of maybe these ideas showing up in other traditions. What immediately jumped out at me was the Buddhist idea of pratitya samutpada, which implies that one thing comes into existence, simultaneously there's another thing implied by that thing, and so there's sort of a trans individual consciousness. which also reminded me that the idea of the audience as the reason for something. If we looked at nature and patterns, there's the idea in Samkhya philosophy of formal cause pre-existing and the material cause, kind of a trans-temporal, as McLuhan was saying here. Eric was saying about the timeless aspect of formal and final cause. And in that system, there's an idea called Purusharta. Purusha is spirit, Prakriti is matter, and Prakriti acts for the sake of Purusharta. So I just noticed my similarities.
Yeah, I mean, I can't follow up exactly on some of the more technical things there, but I think sort of what you're getting at, and this is this question of being and becoming, is I think one of the ways to reframe that and why formal cause looks to be outside of time is try to think of triangles. You're going to draw a lot of triangles. We could just keep drawing them, but the form of the triangle is actually outside of time. So when we're doing the different, when we're cutting the different angles on the triangle, it's not that particular one, but we mean the essence of the triangle. So there's a sense in which, and this goes back to the form substance thing, I mean, I think the form does seem to be outside of time because the particulars we're dealing with in substance are always less than that whole that we mean sort of behind the scenes or outside of the contingencies of the particulars.
Just as far as other traditions, I've seen a kind of reference in Martin Buber and again Adina Karasik's chapters on the Kabbalah, connecting it to formal cause. So I mean, I think it's wide open for that kind of thing. So I would encourage you to write an article on that topic.
It's right there in Joyce, in the ignorance that implies the impression that knits the knowledge that finds the name form.
I'm sorry, Andrew, did I call you?
No, New York's not the center, Mars. That conveys the context, it sweetens the sensation that drives desire that adheres to attachment. Yeah, and why does McLuhan, but apply Joyce? So, yeah,
Okay.
sure. Sorry, Bob, is that okay?
Yeah, very good. Nice to hear from the audience.
Tom?
For Eric, then, if you is the environment and the environment is the formal cause, what would Marshall do with the milieu divine, the divine milieu, Taylor?
I'd have to think about that before giving the answer. I don't know.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Jerry?
And along what Andrew said, some bunch of babble to me, that was from Winnigan's Fate by James Joyce, as he said, it's applied Joyce.
81-1.
Say it again?
81-1.
Way to go. So is this my producers are my consumers? It's a line from Finnegan's Wake. How does that apply to what you just said?
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, that's fine. That's again saying the audience is the formal cause.
Yeah.
Just an observation, an anecdote from McLuhan that connects your notion of the pattern that connects and the pattern that directs. The story of the Boy Scout and the nun. Remember that?
For the audience.
A Boy Scout helps a nun cross the street, and then thank you very much. And the boy said, "Oh, no problem. Any friend of Batman is a friend of mine."
Which doesn't work so well anymore, right?
But it connects and it directs.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Adam West was that.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks.
Category shift.
Yeah.
Make 2 little points.
Yeah.
Okay. I do have a chapter, an essay in a book on technological determinism in Marshall McLuhan. Did actually work on it. It's in the book, Electric Language. It's been out of print for a while, but there are copies floating around.
I have one.
Yes, Bob has one, of course. The second is laws of media. I discovered when writing the essay on formal cause that the laws of media are an analytic of formal cause. And the laws of media, this makes up one of your points, the laws of media are actually there for the purpose of prediction.
Purpose of prediction.
Prediction.
Religion.
So formal cause is prediction. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I'd like to just add one little point too, since you, that going back to Aristotle, and this isn't, Jeremy Campbell has a nice little book, Grammatical Man, it's kind of popular, but it actually brings in, it's mostly about information theory and systems, connecting it to language, and then at the end gets into final causality more so. But he points out that Aristotle was very much a biologist. I mean, of course, he famously created the first great taxonomy of all life, of all life forms. And by the same token, systems theory represents a turn away from mechanistic physics, which is sort of very inorganic and machine-like, to an ecological and organic view of the world, one that takes into account evolution. And connecting to that, I would also like to say, we don't talk about him enough, but Walter Ong was in many ways a biologist, and in fact, part of his early work involved introducing evolution to the church, in a way that I guess he succeeded, perhaps where Teilhard de Chardin wasn't able to succeed, and I think that's very, very significant that media ecology is grounded in a scientific view of the world and is consistent with a biological understanding. It's the extensions of the human body. You have the senses, you have to know biology to really understand these things.
But can I just say that, I think this is where an interesting tension comes in between the tetrads and formal cause, because as I'm understanding both you and Bob, in some way, the problem with the tetrads is that the retrieval implies that it's always already there. And the emergence issue kind of cuts against that grain.
Yeah.
Having the shortest presentation, I will ask a question of Eric. You said, I believe final cause is an effect. It's the effect that you want to create. And it's a certain flip here. So, I'm not saying what you said is not true, but I'm saying that in addition, one can think of the final cause as an effect you want to create. So when we talk about reversal of cause and effect, the final cause is the effect that you want to create, and then you use the causes of material, efficient, and formal to achieve the effect you want to create. Your reaction.
Is that a question?
Yeah, that was a question.
Yeah.
Your reaction.
No.
That's still not a question.
Come back to the name.
Yeah,
Final
what
cause.
is your,
It's a cause.
formally speaking?
It may be an objective or a goal, but it's a cause. And the cause, final cause, is found at the very beginning, not at the end.
So all effects are then causes.
No?
Yes, the effect of the telegraph was the cause of the telephone.
Let's put it this way, formal cause is entirely composed of side effects.
Just to say, I think another way to look at it is that the four causes are not isolatable, except in conceptually, but in reality, they're all present. They're subsets of cause rather than separate causes that existed independently. That's the way, I think that's the proper way to understand it.
But for Aristotle, not all four are present for all things.
Well, I don't know, Eric, would you agree that they are, no?
No,
That's
Oh, well.
Never mind. It's incorrect.
but it,
I
you know,
think it's
this is the
correct.
kind of thing that
The
has to
difference
go
between
on
a
with
shoe
something
and a
new.
horse.
You've got to try it on everything inside and see what it works with and what it doesn't.
Right.
I want to claim Aristotle was a systems thinker because he said the whole is more than the sum of its parts. So he's a little bit towards systems way of thinking. I think he used the word heap. And then James Joyce uses midden heap.
Yes. And
So from the heap, from the midden heap comes new things.
What about you, Ryan?
Yates also said the makers of innovation is a junkyard.
Junkyard, I think, are the last words that we should hear.